Welcome into another edition of Inside Carolina's Day After. I'm Tommy Ashley. We're sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt and Congruity. That is Buck Sanders. That is Jason Staples. Carolina loses by 1 point in Durham. First thing, before we get started on football talk, things a lot more important than football going on in North Carolina, in the Southeast. If you have an opportunity to help out some of that hurricane relief stuff, do it. If you haven't paid attention there's a lot of mess in western North Carolina and Georgia, South Carolina, that part of the country, and all the way down to Florida. A lot of people in dire need of help, either in manpower, boots on the ground, or support for your local Red Cross or whatever you do to help folks out. Do it. Take care of those folks. They need it. It is awful in some parts of this country. So for a respite, we're going to talk about Duke, Carolina. I'm not going to say a word first, Buck. I'm just going to let you have the opening thoughts.
Where do I go with opening thoughts? I'm not sure that this was the game that everybody expected to see. It was probably a lot lower scoring game than most people expected to see. And the talk is going to be about the first half and the second half and what went wrong in the second half. The first half, North Carolina scored 17 points, which was not great. The offense was not great in the first half. It was okay. But the good news was the defense held Duke scoreless. Then things switched up at halftime, and we all know what happened. Or do we, really? I don't know. Years ago, I'm going to do a brief story here. My sister called me at work and asked if I'd come pick her up. I said, sure, where are you? What happened? She said, I've had an accident. And she gave me directions, which was about maybe 4 or 5 miles from your house, Tommy, in Johnson County, on Interstate 40. And she had rolled her car in the median of I-40. It's upside down, and it skidded about 300 feet down I-40. I said, what in the world? And so I'm talking to my sister, and how did that happen? She said, I really don't know how that happened. It just happened. Well, after that, I made sure if we were in the car together, I was driving, because if she didn't know how she turned the car upside down going 70 miles an hour on I-40, then she had no business driving the car. And unless this North Carolina staff has some answers, they don't need to be driving the car. And what we've seen to date is that they have plenty of questions and plenty of responses, but they don't seem to have any answers. So that's my takeaway from this game.
Jim Wardall says it's foggy in Johnson County. It is. It's foggy out this window, but I think the picture is coming more and more clear. If it hadn't already been crystal clear over the last couple of weeks. But Jason, you've watched a lot of football. I mean, we saw it. Somebody mentioned Georgia, Bama. We saw that. What was it, 30-0 or 30-7 in that, and it came down to the very end. That's just a different level of football those two teams were playing. But you watch this Carolina game, I can't say I'm surprised at all. I said before the game, and we can argue about this, that there would be no Drake May to save the day, that Duke would have a lead late and Carolina wouldn't have the ability to get it done as they've done repeatedly with high-end quarterbacks. And it continues to feel like high-end quarterbacks have propped this staff up more and more. But, Jason, your thoughts on what you saw and if it were surprising at all?
Well, I mean, by this point, Charlie Brown really shouldn't be surprised when the ball gets pulled out when he goes to kick it. So, I mean, was anybody surprised? I would be surprised if anybody was surprised by yesterday. That's kind of where I come down on it. And, the game, everything that happened in that game was in keeping with stuff that's been happening all season. and really for, through multiple staffs at Carolina at different points. Now, Carolina had a 6-game winning streak or 5-game winning streak against Duke coming into this, so that it hasn't happened against Duke in a while, but it dang near did last year, right? I mean, last year it took Drake May willing that team to victory, despite the fact that they were the better, more talented team, at least on paper. And this year the game came out to basically 2 even teams again, battling down to the end. And at this point, that shouldn't be a surprise. But look, my take on a lot of this in terms of the game itself is I thought once Carolina went up 20-0, I thought they kind of breathed a sigh of relief. You could see that team go, all right, we're good. And it looked to me like the level of strain across the board in certain ways relaxed just a little, and that's just enough to let a team like Duke get a little bit of a foothold. And once they did, they were able to come back and win the football game. But that, to me, I just saw a bit of a transition to where they kind of just breathed out. They exhaled a little bit on, all right, well, we got things fixed. Things are fine. All right. And then, oh, shoot. And by the time Duke had scored and made it 20-14, they weren't, you just didn't see the same level of strain at that point. You could see them kind of like, oh, shoot, we better get ready. We better get back to doing this. And by that point, the momentum was against them, and Duke was starting to take control on the interior of the lines, and that's the ball game.
But the thing for me watching it, and I was there, and I have not gone back and watched it again. I will, is that once the panic set in, you saw it across the board, from the staff to the players. We talk all the time about you get what you allow, but not only do you get what you allow, you get what you put off. And if a child sees a parent panicking, that child's going to panic. And that's what it looked like to me, is that like the ball started rolling down the hill and they had no answer to put their foot down to stop it. And it starts at the top. And this is the thing. And somebody in the chat or on the message board said, I don't want to hear about the state of the program. Tell me why they lost this game. They lost this game because of the state of the program. Because there was nobody to stand up and say, this ain't happening tonight. I'll give them credit for coming out and playing much better than I thought they would. I thought we were going to have a bellwether game one way or another. I thought it was going to be Carolina was going to blow Duke out, or Duke was going to blow Carolina out, and it was going to be everything was going to be blown up by the time we did this show this morning. But instead, we get one of those in the middle. If we'd have done one more thing right, we wouldn't be here talking about this. If Bryson Nesbitt gets hit on the wheel route, then we're kicking a field goal to win the game, those type comments. But then the fact of the matter, Buckets, is deeper than that. So do you share that opinion that this is I think it's unfixable? I mean, after 6 years, if you're doing the same things every time, then something ain't right, and you got to change something. I mean, I don't know how else way to put it. I don't know if that's scorched earth enough for people, but at some point you have to have leadership that is going to lead rather than getting caught up in the excuses. So, Buck, that's my rant for the day. Your thoughts here on how this game continues to be a symptom or an effect of the program issues that we've seen in the last 6 years. Really in the last ever, but last 6 years.
You know, I'm going to go back to what Jason was talking about a little earlier, and that when North Carolina got up 20-0, and there seemed like a collective exhale on the sideline, and I think for good reason, because heading into this game when they kicked off, nobody had a clue how North Carolina was going to respond. Not even them. They didn't know how they were going to respond after last week when they had 70 put on them at home by James Madison. And nobody knew, how is this defense going to respond this week? I mean, it could have gone a bunch of different ways, right? And in the first half, it looked like, okay, yeah, last week was an anomaly. It was a one-off. We could forget about that and play our game and go on and have a decent season. Well, that didn't last into the second half, and that was the issue. And I think that roller coaster of emotion of going from not knowing to knowing to not knowing is what typifies UNC football. And it's like they're the only people in the world that respond in adverse ways collectively when they face adversity. So there's that Jason talked about. And, I do think individual players do matter at times when, for example, last year they had Cecil Gray at linebacker, and he was a big deal not for just his level of play, but because he would grab the rest of the defense by the scruff of the neck and just raise sand on the sidelines. I know, Tommy, you remember the Georgia State game where he just went off and like he was going to punch some guys on the sideline. So he's not there, and I don't know if they have that guy on this team. Maybe Kamen Rucker, but he's not playing. So I don't know who it is over on the defensive side of the ball that can just pull everybody together and say, "Hey, we got to stop this." Because once the snowball got rolling, as you said, Tommy, it was over. And in the first half, Duke did not have a run of over 10 yards, not a single one. They had one explosive play for like 18 yards of pass. In the second half, they had 7 rushing plays of over 10 yards. And that's just not something you can explain, looking at advanced stats and whatnot. How did they not have a single carry in the first half of over 10 yards and have 7 in the second half? 104 of their rushing yards, which had 185, 104 of them came on explosive plays. I mean, North Carolina was getting gashed in the run, and I think Duke only had 37 yards at the first half. How you explain that, I just don't know. And if nobody from the outside can look at it and say, "Oh, here's why they fell apart in the second half," if nobody can do that, well, how do we know how the staff can do it? And if staff can't do it, there's only one. Can't change the whole entire team, but you can change the staff. Is where I come down. And for this to get changed, North Carolina has to make a change.
Yeah. Do you venture to the bottom of the abyss, or do you do something to get back afloat? We'll see. Jason, let's talk a little bit about that. Looking at PFF stats on the defensive side, first of all, they missed 20 tackles yesterday, and I'd wager that at least 75% of those were in the second half. We've talked about Amari Campbell being really good. The PFF grades are not. Joshua Harris has been really good. The PFF grades are not. Jahvaree Ritzy's PFF grades are awful for this game, and granted, that's only one dot. But what did you see differently, Jason, that was happening for Carolina? Was it strictly a Duke adjustment, or was it some sort of let up like you talked about, an exhale? That's the thing I'm interested in your take when you watch this stuff is, okay, the first half they held Duke to this and that, which I thought Murphy for Duke was terrible in the first half, and that helped. But in the second half, Carolina couldn't get off blocks. They couldn't tackle anybody. How do you see it flipping, or how did it flip in your mind there?
Well, again, I do feel like they sort of collectively stepped off the gas. I do that was just my perception, is that the strain at certain levels wasn't there. But the other aspect of this is a line of scrimmage sport. And you just highlighted some of the key spots there. When push came to shove, and there was a lot of shoving going on in the second half, Duke was able to kind of find who they were and run the football downhill on Carolina's defense. And the concern that we all had coming into this season manifested. That Carolina wasn't able to stop the run on the defensive interior. They got pushed around. And, the thing, you got to tip your cap to Duke on this, in that they were down by 20 points and they didn't panic. They just kept running the football. Normally, most teams, most coaching staffs, they get down by 20 points in the third quarter and they start dropping back and trying to throw the football. And with Malik Murphy, the way that he was playing, that's curtains for Duke. Duke said, we still think we can run the football on this team, as they start to tire a little bit, as some of those defensive interior guys don't really want to keep playing hard, as they stand up a little bit more as all this happens. And Duke dominated the line of scrimmage in the second half. And that was the ball game. Real simple. I mean, Duke dominated the line of scrimmage, and Carolina on the defensive line, I mean, Joshua Harris, Jahvaree Ritzie, Travis Shaw, that's 4 of your lowest 5 rated guys on Pro Football Focus, and I am not surprised, because watching in real time, I was going, man, those defensive tackles are getting pushed around. Those defensive tackles, they're not playing with great pad level right now. They're not getting off the ball right now. And Duke started to take over there. That's where this game was won and lost. Those, 4 or 5 guys right around the ball when it snapped. And Duke just kept handing off, and those backs started to find their space, and that was the ball game. So, I think the Pro Football Focus grades are basically right. I mean, look, these are the guys that graded under 50%. And every one of these stands to the eye test. I would have guessed this before I looked at these. Stick Lane, who had a really, really rough game in this game. Stick did not play well. Had a couple of missed tackles that were crucial, and missed some run fits in some other cases. Got picked on in the passing game some. So Stick Lane, Bo Atkinson, Travis Shaw, Jacoby Cowan, Amari Campbell, Joshua Harris, and Jahvaree Ritzie. All of those guys below 50, and Harris and Ritzie at 40 or below. Well, everyone, you think about this, you build a defense, it's like a baseball team, right? You got your shortstop, your second baseman, and your center fielder, your pitcher and your catcher is the middle of your defense, right? Well, the middle of your defense is defensive tackles. 3 of those guys, Shaw, Harris, and Ritzie, are on that list. Then you got a linebacker, and then you got a safety. And where did Duke attack? Straight up the middle. This is a problem. And this is what we were sort of afraid of coming into the year was, what was our analysis coming into the year? Can this team hold up on the interior? They've got a lot of other nice pieces. Are they going to be able to hold up on the interior against teams that really want to bully them there? And they did pretty well against Minnesota. That was a good sign. But Duke was able to bully them.
Desmond Evans graded out top of the list. A lot of people pick on him. He, according to these grades, had one of his best games of the year. Eccles, Huzzy. But yeah, when your interior defensive line's getting just mashed like they were against Duke, then it's a problem. And to your point, Jason, props to Duke for not just going straight shotgun throw it all over the field when they got behind, which is kind of what Carolina did against James Madison. They panicked and started throwing it all the time rather than rely on Amari and Hampton. We're going to talk about the offense on the other side of the break here, but I can't understand. Help me understand. Help the fan base and me and everybody else understand why it's the same song and dance here. I mean, Ritzy plays great against Minnesota and doesn't show up against Duke. Joshua Harris has been solid, not against Duke. From your eye test, what are you seeing there? Is it an effort thing, like Jason said? It can't be a tired thing. Jacoby Cowan led the team in snaps, which he earned the ability to do that, but then he did not play great. But what are you seeing, Buck, that makes this just the same old song and dance every single week against quality competition?
You know, I think there's certainly something to what Jason's talking about, but I saw tackles getting missed all over the field. I mean, there were plenty of other places to point when it came to, in the second half, they weren't taking the right angles. They weren't getting the ball carrier. Guys were breaking off long runs. And when you're breaking off long runs of 18, 19, 17 yards, it's not just the interior. Some other tackles are being missed all over the place. And, you know, the thing, and I know it's not, no advanced metrics can capture this point, but when Duke came out, quite honestly, in the first quarter, I thought they looked flat. I thought they looked almost uninterested in being there. I mean, I've seen North Carolina come out like that plenty of times, so I know what it looks like. But Duke just didn't seem to have much energy. They, just didn't seem to be that into the game. But in the second half, I don't know what they said to them at halftime, but I don't think it was necessarily so much scheme or the interior or a bad safety play or any of that. Pretty quickly in the second quarter, Duke had a completely different attitude. They were more aggressive. They started being the hammer instead of being the nail, and they made North Carolina the nail. And then once that started to have an effect, I think North Carolina pulled its head in like a turtle and said, well, we've seen this before, and this is not good. We're going to have to be more cautious. We're going to have to be more careful. And then it just snowballed from there. So I don't think this is true in every game you lose. I mean, sometimes you get out-coached, out-schemed, just out-talented. But in this game, it was more emotion, I think, and Duke sees that in the second half. And North Carolina had no response. They had no counter to that. And they just went downhill from there.
Jason, anything left on the defensive side before I flip over? Because when it all comes down to it, you give up 21 points in the college football game, you should win, especially when you get a 17, 20-point head start. But anything left on the defensive side, Jason, from that? I thought some guys played really well. It'll be overshadowed with what happened. But final thoughts on the defense before we flip it.
No, I don't think there was much left on the defensive side by the time the game ended.
Works for me. Johnny T-Shirt, JohnnyT-Shirt.com, sponsors of the podcast, sponsors Inside Carolina, friends of you, the Inside Carolina listener, watcher, subscriber. Get your 10% off their order on Franklin Street or online. All the gear you need for your Carolina fandom. It's tough to spend money on the product we're seeing on the field. But Johnny T-Shirt needs your support all the time. And if you don't want to buy athletic gear, you can get journalism school shirts. You can get School of Medicine shirts. You can get whatever you need from Johnny T-Shirt because they support every aspect of your Carolina fandom, Carolina ability to deck out in Carolina blue. National guys pay the bills. We'll come right back. It's the day after Carolina falls in Durham. All right, let's talk offense. And I just said it, but leading into that Johnny T-shirt read, is the offense just complete? You mentioned the turtle. It felt like that's what I saw from the offense after the fact. Omarion Hampton, I believe, had 20-plus snaps, 20. Anyway, he did not have enough in that game. We've talked about not relying on him too much, but I thought the game could have been won and at least salted away with a Hampton and even Davion Gauss. But your overall thoughts here on the offensive side, just some head-scratching moments we've seen really all season, but here in this game, your thoughts there?
Well, again, I think we can, and this is probably tiresome to talk about it in terms of two halves, but the first half and the second half were completely different for the offense as well. And that's about, again, I think emotion on Duke's part, and they got much more aggressive. But in the second half, I mean, you all saw there was times Hampton is getting tackled simultaneous to receiving the football from Criswell. There's a defender tackling him at the same moment. It's a wonder he didn't fumble the ball multiple times, because he's getting hit about the same time as he's getting his hands on the ball. So, and then I think that affects everything else. If you can't run the ball effectively, which North Carolina did in the first half, but you can't run the ball effectively. Duke was, I don't know, they were pretty high up there in the, I read somewhere they were leading the nation in like sacks and tackles for loss or something like that. But they were pretty high up there as far as pressuring the quarterback. And Manning has an aggressive defense. When that's happening, you can't run the ball and your quarterback's constantly under pressure. That's going to make a difference in the football game. And the offensive line, I thought, had its worst game as far as run blocking, or worst half at least in run blocking, as they had Saturday night, last night. We got to do a better job of getting Hampton yards before contact, instead of counting on him getting all the yards after contact. And just to answer a question in chat, Jeffrey Polly, I don't have a clue who's going to be next year's head coach. I have no freaking idea, but that's going to be what we're going to be talking about a lot between now and the end of the season.
Jason, what Duke do differently in the second half? Or did they do anything? I tell you what, we talked about Hampton. You talked about Hampton specifically. You said he's going to have a lot of 1 yard and negative rushes, but then he's going to be able to pop a few and get some yards. And that's exactly what happened. Had 29 carries for 103 yards. I believe he had 47 of those yards on 3 carries. But what'd you see from Duke throughout the game, but especially in the second half, to just sort of shut it down and allow them to come back?
Well, the place I want to actually start here is I'm going to go into the Pro Football Focus grades again. So, top 3 grades on the offense. Kind of where you would expect. Willie Lampkin, Omarion Hampton, and Austin Blaskey. Not surprising. Those guys all played well. When you get to the bottom, though, yeah.
I don't know if I've ever seen that, and I know PFF is 1 dot. I don't know if I've ever seen numbers like I see at the bottom of this list.
You need to go watch the 2018 Florida State, or 2019 Florida State at Syracuse. I think both offensive tackles were in the teens in that game.
Well, here you go. Yeah. This is something we've pointed at all year.
It's getting there, right? So at the bottom, you had, a freshman who got baptized a little bit. You had Banfield at 53. You had Copenhagen, who struggled in this game, 51. And then right here, you had Malik McGowan, 49.8, Howard Sampson, 42.8, Trevion Green, 29.4. Well, I mean, when it comes down to it, you want to, as you said, you felt like you almost needed to hand it to Hampton more. He had 29 carries.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're getting that level of struggle at offensive tackle and both tackles, it's going to make things tough. And they struggled exactly where we had talked about in the preseason as well. It's a matter of when those guys lean on you, they're enormous. They can push. They can get push. The problem is that what Duke figured out was they put some guys with some quickness over top of those guys, and they kept getting good angles. And this is something they're going to have to contend with the rest of the year. And pass blocking wise, both guys gave up a ton of pressure. I mean, Trevion Green's Pro Football Focus pass blocking grade was a 0.0. And frankly, it's a fair grade based on what I saw. He struggled big time in pass blocking. And, Sampson got beat a few times in pass blocking as well. So, you have some limitations there. This offensive line has still, by and large, been better than last year's was, but it's got some serious limitations. And so, they're trying to call around that a little bit. And by the time you got to the second half, Duke had kind of figured out how to slant and stunt and put the quick guys in position to be able to get some angles and all that. And the game, basically the space that Hampton had wasn't really there all that much in the second half. He had, I think, 2 runs of any real consequence in the second half, or 3 runs of any consequence. And what they did a great job of was when he got to the secondary, they kept those runs from being, after the first half at least, they kept those runs from being home runs. They were content to give Hampton singles and doubles, but he wasn't able, because they tackled so well in the secondary, which is something Carolina didn't do. Because they tackled so well in the secondary, he was hitting singles and doubles, and they needed to score, and those didn't hit any runs in.
Yeah, it was, I mean, to your point, there was a couple runs there. I thought he was going to break off for touchdowns, and they got him on the ground. I mean, at some point you got to give Duke props there, but Buck, this offensive line, I mean, my question is, it's not new. You can't keep doing the same thing over and over and over if you know your limitations on the outside. We're 5 games in, and those limitations have exposed themselves repeatedly. And Pittsburgh's going to do the same thing. Georgia Tech's Lord going to do the same thing. That they ate Carolina up for the last 2 or 3 years doing that very same thing. So, but what needs to change here? I mean, feels like a little bit like definition of insanity. And Hampton's been great. Jacoby Criswell's been solid enough. He missed a couple passes that may change the trajectory of the game. But some of the plays, and we never talk about play calling because it's not all about that if guys execute. But what you thinking watching this?
Well, just to put some numbers to what y'all talking about as far as Hampton's concerned, he only had 1 explosive run play in the second half, 20 yards, and that was it. Everything else, he had 3 on the game, which is not a lot for him, and had 2 in the first half. The other 2 of North Carolina's 5 explosive plays came from Criswell and Davion Goss. So he didn't hit those long explosive plays in this game like he has done in other games. And Jason summarized that pretty well by just saying that the back end of Duke's defense tackles really well. That's what we're seeing there. As far as the offensive line getting pushed around, I don't have an answer for you. And this is not something you can't change this horse's saddle in the middle of this stream. You know, it is what it is right now. And it's going to be for the rest of the year. So, what has to change is we're just going to have to wait to another time to find out what that is, because it's not going to be this year. They might improve. They might have games that are better than others. They might run into a defensive line that's stouter than Duke's and look even worse. But it's not something. This is not something you can tweak, patch up, clean up, whatever the current coaching jargon is. You can't tweak this. I mean, has to be some fundamental changes at work here. So I don't have any answers, and apparently neither does this staff. So we'll just have to ride that out.
Jason, we're not going to be on this one for very long. 36 minutes in, there's not much more to talk about. I do want to hit on special teams in a second, but offensively, to Buck's point, is there things this staff could be doing differently with this bunch to better produce consistent results? Or, as Buck says, this kind of is what it is at this point in the season. I feel like there needs to be some sort of shift. I'm not smart enough to say what it is, but your thoughts in this regard, because as we've seen, the offense can produce. Might be a difference in opponent ability there as well. But what needs to change, or what can change at this point in the season?
Honestly, I don't know that there's a bunch of easy answers there in terms of what can you do to change. You know, that you're already handing it to Hampton 25, 30 times a game. What are you going to do? Say, well, you need to give it to your best player more?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're already wearing a bunch of tread off his tires for the next level. I mean, I hate seeing him get that many carries at this level, knowing how much that impacts career long term, because he's taken a beating this year. And, you know, beyond that, you've got a quarterback that has done a lot of good things so far, but you've got some limitations in terms of being able to protect him on certain stuff, and some of the things that you've got some limitations at wide receiver in terms of what those guys seem to be able to do in terms of creating space and all that. So, and the other thing is that the one thing that Criswell has not done well at all, and this was what we knew going in was a bit of a weakness, is, you know, some of those verticals, you know, the bucket type throws where you're trying to drop it in the bucket, you know, on a go route, that sort of thing. He hasn't really hit any of those. So, you know, continually throws them too flat and overthrows guys. So, you know, if there's one thing I'd probably try to work on a bunch right now, it's having the wide receivers and the quarterbacks just spend extra periods working on those on some of those verticals, on some back shoulders, and also some over the top bucket throws, just to where you're getting used to putting proper air under them and all that. Because I do think right now, one of the things that's really missing from this Carolina offense is the ability to get some chunk plays down the field on some of those, you know, force the safeties back kind of plays. Beyond that, I don't know that there's a whole lot of answers on the offensive side. And I think defensively, you've just got some personnel stuff that is, you have to call around, and you have to challenge those guys on the interior to continue to play with lower pad level and more power through the first couple steps, and be able to handle some of the combo blocks and things that they saw in this. But like Buck said, you can't really just change that saddle midstream. You know, you're going to have to ride the horse you're on. And that's, you know, this is something that both programs I'm covering right now are dealing with. You've got people that are saying changes need to be made. Well, yeah, that's fine. You can't make the changes that need to be made 4 games into a season, 5 games into a season. You can't do that. It's just not the way this game works. You have to play out the season. You have to continue to do. You have to keep playing the games that remain on your schedule, and for the most part, you're going to have to keep doing what you've got, and iterate on some of the things that you've had some strength on. But I just don't think there's a lot of easy answers. Fortunately, the schedule has a lot of winnable games. I mean, we talked about it coming into the year. There are a lot of 50-50 games on this schedule. They just lost a 50-50 game. And it was a 50-50 game. It was a 1-point game. But they've got to go out and they've got to figure out, if there's nothing else, figure out how to play with accountability and how to have enough strain that you're winning 50-50 games instead of losing those games down the stretch.
There's a lot there. We could talk about forever, but Buck, I'm going to let you get the closing thoughts here. I just don't think 50-50 games, to win them, require somebody to step up, whether it's on the field or on the staff or in the administration, whatever you want to call it. But Buck, close us out here. North Carolina doing North Carolina things on the field, loses to Duke 21-20. Duke didn't quit. Came back. I said give them credit, and I believe that. They showed some things that Carolina has not shown over the years as it currently sits. But, Buck, I'll let you get the final word. Oh, and somebody mentioned in the chat, I'm sorry, a couple things. I'm sorry, Buck, because you're going to get the final word. Special teams, I don't know how you continue to employ people that implement faulty things in special teams. Another punt block that some miraculous way ends up in the Carolina first down. I mean, at what point do you do something different there? And also the penalties, the post snap penalties, throwing guys down by seniors. Anyway, I think Jason wants in, but Buck, you're going to get the final word.
Yeah, for those that are listening to this on the podcast instead of watching it on YouTube, Jason stroked out at the mention of the block punt. So
it's the same block punt they've had at the same formation, the same protection. They've now given up 3 blocks on in the last 2 years for the same same thing.
That's very extremely frustrating, but it's almost not as frustrating to me as watching Tom McGinnis just arbitrarily shank a punt out of bounds, 10 yards downfield. I mean, I don't know how that happens. Just once in a while, he'll have a foot fart, I guess you would call it. So there are special team issues as well. I think the thing that, if we're going to be practical about it, which at this point they don't have much choice, they need to concentrate on identifying those things they can fix. If they can find out why they drove the car in the ditch, they need to solve that problem. They need to concentrate on those things that they can fix this year for the rest of the year. And the unspoken part of all of this is, we're not located in Columbia, South Carolina. North Carolina fans are not well known for their support of teams that look this bad. And we will see that next weekend at Pitt, I'm pretty sure. So, once you get a program headed in that direction, you just got to fix the thing you can fix today, and worry about the rest of it when the season's over. So there's a lot to fix at UNC. We'll see how they do with it, but that's my take right now.
Anything left? I agree with you, Buck. Fix what you can fix and stop doing what's not working. And clearly, there's some things that are not working, and yet they keep getting done at Carolina. Anything left before I get out of here at 45 minutes on the show?
I said I know internally, I think I said it on the podcast, that I was surprised that they brought back the same special teams coordination as last year, and I'm gonna stand on that. I'm shocked at what they're doing at times on special teams.
We should have done an over-under portion of block punts in a game because it's happened how many times? It's 2 straight weeks. So, yeah, got a lot going on for North Carolina football. A lot of changes need to be made. Will they be made by folks higher up the food chain than all of us? That's Buck Sanders, Jason Staples. I'm Tommy Ashley. Johnny T-shirt and Congruity. Email matt@congruityhr.com. Get your free assessment for your small to mid-sized business. They can help you out. They can make a change in your small business and make it elite. Matt
They would
@congruityhr.
pull. Those guys would know to pull a veteran wide receiver or a freshman wide receiver for inexcusable penalties or lack of effort or whatever, rather than just sticking them right back out there with no accountability.
That is it. Accountability.
Those guys understand how to run things. You know, those Congruity guys are great.
Accountability in your business, accountability on the field. Haven't seen much of it going on at Carolina football the last few weeks. Maybe we'll see something different. If you've been a longtime fan of Carolina football, you probably know the answer to that. Everybody stay safe. And again, if you have an opportunity to help the folks that are struggling with hurricane damage, do it. Everybody needs a little love. Those folks dealing with all that across the country, the Southeast, need all the help you can give them. And while you're at it, if you need some peace, check out Inside Carolina. There is no offseason here. But, Jason, thanks, guys.